Welcome to Tech Talks. I'm Holly Scott. I'm here in 160 Studios, and visiting via Zoom is my friend Ananth Ravi. He is the CEO and co-founder of Molly Surgical. Welcome, Ananth.
Thanks for having me, Holly.
I'm thrilled to have you here today. I'm bullish about your technology for a few reasons. I think the simplicity and elegance is outstanding. I also know firsthand from having friends go through this how life-changing this can be. So I'm anxious to get into it. I'd love if you could share a bit about how you got here. I think it's fascinating, the work you did and how this technology came to light. Could you give us a little history there?
Oh yeah, I can talk your ear off about that story. But yeah, if you told me 5 or even 6 years ago that I'd be where we are, I would probably laugh you off the face of your chair. I started off my professional career as a medical physicist by trade, and I was responsible for the care of breast, cervical, and prostate cancer patients, but mainly through radiation oncology. But my research focus at that time was always about improving patients' experience of therapy. So trying to make their treatment experience a non-event in their life. So when they'd come in, they would have treatment, but they wouldn't remember it. And that to me was the biggest compliment is of a patient didn't know who I was, didn't know that they even had treatment, and went home, and it was just a non-traumatic event in their life. And so my focus was always that. And I guess I got a reputation around that. So one of the surgeons at the time, Dr. Nicole Kong at Sunnybrook Hospital, where we worked, approached me about improving the patient experience of breast cancer patients in the hospital. And she was saying, we're currently doing wires. We'd like to transition away from something, and we'd want to try and use these radioactive seeds instead. And I immediately said, this is a bad idea. I don't want to do this. And she's like, you should just go listen to the plight of our patients right now. And so I participated, and I was fortunate to participate in a patient family advisory council meeting where this one patient came in and she talked about her story of fasting for 24 hours before the procedure, coming in the morning radiology and having a wire placed, and she described it as a fishing hook, and being in hospital for 6 hours in pain, anxious, and she even fainted. Mm-hmm. And she talked about it with such emotion that we were compelled. Like it was anybody in the audience, anywhere would have been compelled to do something. So not being special, so we formed a team, one of them being my other co-founder, Mr. John Dillon, and we start iterating with solutions, working with Nicole Lecong, the surgeon, and we arrived at Molly. And so that was still very much in the hospital. And then we started to work with technology transfer. We started getting a lot, the one thing, we do a lot of research, but something about Molly was attractive to everybody outside the hospital. And normally when you're a researcher, you're trying to push your idea onto everybody else. This is the first time people were asking to participate and saw the value right out of the gate. So we knew there was something special here. And so then we began the slow and arduous journey of commercializing to try and get this out to the market and everyone, and to the benefit of patients. And today we're now at over 180 institutions and 17,000 patients treated, and growing day by day.
It's phenomenal. And I will tell you, there are many, many young companies that would give two arms to have that kind of rapid success. That's unique and unusual, and I commend you, because if you look at it and you see the problem that you were solving, it is, again, the simplicity, the elegance, and that true, clear market need is there. So amazing job. Because I'm interested in career, and because that's what weighs on my mind in addition to technology. I love them both. I am curious. Medical physicist is not as common as other clinical states and other clinical areas of focus. I'm curious on 2 points. In terms of your upbringing and what brought you to the clinical side, what defined career for you earlier in stage, and what brought you to that and to that area of specialty? And I am interested in hearing more about that focus on user experience, because it sounds like that was really the core and the primary catalyst for coming into the technology and where Molly landed. Do you mind sharing a little more color on a bit of that personal journey?
Sure, absolutely. Where and we can talk for hours. I'm so I think the personal journey, and it's funny, I've had these questions and I have had to reflect on why I'm where I am. And it's not an easy question to answer by any stretch, but I think it really like it started when I was young. My interest in medicine in general started when I was young. Like I lived in Africa for 10 years. And then in a very short span, like my young best friend at the time passed away from brain cancer, and my grandmother passed away from another type of cancer. And you know, I was around the environment. I was still very young, but I knew there was all this talking in hushed rooms of like if they were in the States in and somewhere else with modern healthcare, they would have been able to like get better treatments and so early on I got this feeling of like there's an inequity of care, but there is technology there that could have been potentially life-saving. And the other piece that's also very unique was like I always liked engineering. Like I didn't want to, I never really was interested in becoming a physician by any stretch, but I loved engineering, building, taking things apart because the only show we had, the two shows that we had and I watched all the time was $6 Million Man Steve Austin and MacGyver were the two shows we had in Africa at the time that I would watch like nonstop. So there's this fascination with like making the human body like a blend of engineering and so I when I came to Canada eventually, I was geared toward biomedical engineering as my specialty because I had this, it was like the ideal blend and it kind of I was gravitating to that anyway. And medical physicists, you're right. Like it's funny. It's like almost an immediate conversation killer when they ask you, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm a medical physicist." They're like, "Okay," and they'll walk away and turn around. So I choose to not say that in most conversations, and but like I didn't know it existed at the time when I was an undergrad, and it was just fortuitous. I was applying to a bunch of summer programs, trying to get a position, trying to discover what I like, and more importantly, what I don't like. Um, did a couple finance jobs, didn't really enjoy those, really started to gravitate towards the healthcare system. Found one where I showed up and it was my first placement and we were asked to build an algorithm that helped to draw cancers on CT scans um, using PET imaging. And previous to that, I thought physicians were objective. It was all science-based. There's no art in medicine. And this study showed that like there was 25 radiation oncologists around in the province, and there was variability in how they would delineate targets because it's not objective. There's an art to medicine. But then you threw in functional imaging, and all of a sudden the variability shrunk. And that was just mind-blowing to me as a young like student thinking like technology can influence this. There's so much art, there's so much level for improvement. What I thought was already top of the line is not, and there's this other field. And so this blend of artistry plus technology plus impact, like I was like in love. So that then it was that summer, I'm like, I want to do this. I want to be a medical physicist. And the two people that hired me were medical physicists, and they kind of mentored me along the way to like I went through, got a PhD, did the residency, started the profession, and then while I was a medical physicist, it is such a rewarding career for anybody that's in it. Should definitely consider it because you have immediate patient impact, but you're tasked with implementing the latest and the greatest and the newest in a safe and effective manner. And to me, that was fascinating, but it also primed me to create new things and address things. So, like, your second half of the question was like, how about the user experience? And that came with time. Like when I first started, it was all about how do we get cure? How do we put definitive, like how do we give more dose, get rid of the cancer at all costs?
Mhm.
But then as you kind of go on, you see the impacts of and the toxicities associated with care. And sometimes the treatment themselves are so arduous on patients that they come back and they talk about the treatment itself. Like our staff was really friendly, amazing, but they have this almost traumatic experience with just the journey through treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we've cured them, like they still have this memory of it, like this scar tissue. And so that's where my research kind of shifted to like how do we make the burden on patients, if we can still get the same level of cure,
Mm-hmm.
how do we make this burden on patients less? And so a lot of my research was very practical, pragmatic on improving clinical processes to so that a patient would come in and leave, and the treatment would be just a non-event.
Hmm. That's fascinating. That's fascinating. And if you think about especially the patient population, in the initial target is breast cancer, you have a wide range of ages. You have a wide range of participants, various points of their lives. Some young mothers, some older, some you have life going on while they're going through this treatment, and it is typically a complex path. It's not just get rid of it, surgery. It's there's all facets of it. Maybe for our audience's purposes, because it may not be as widely understood, tell me more about what that current standard of care, that wire procedure involved. I know you mentioned your patient, but why were they going at it? What was the intention with the wire therapy, and how are we solving this with Molly in a different way?
That's a great question, and it's because of a very good thing. Like right now, we live in an era where we have screening, and I thoroughly encourage any patient out there that's eligible for screening to go get screened, because what that allows us to do is to catch cancers very early, while surgeons can remove them comprehensively, and the prognosis is better than it's ever been before. The challenge, though, is because we catch them so early, they're often so tiny, you can't see them, you can't feel them. So surgically, they're very hard to find without some method of marking that spot where they have to be removed. So what happens is patients come in the morning of the procedure into radiology. The radiologist will take an ultrasound and a mammography to image where the cancer is, mark it with a wire, and then in surgery, they then will go in, palpate for the wire, figure out where it stops, and then take out the cancerous tissue around it.
Mm.
Challenge for a patient, though, is from the time of the implant, they have this wire extending out of their breast, and they're waiting for surgery. And in some instances, they have to drive from radiology to the surgical facility. So the overall experience becomes quite traumatic. Versus versus Molly, where instead of this wire, our intent is to place a tiny permanent magnet the size of a sesame seed. This can be done in a 5-minute procedure, 30 days before the surgical date. So at the patient's choosing, they have autonomy to come in for literally a 10-minute procedure and they leave, and it's no more painful than a blood draw. And so they place the marker and they go home. And then in surgery, the surgeon has a wand and a tablet that act like a GPS. So now they're not just feeling with the wire, which can move, dislodge, and not really active. And there's chances that it's an accurately like localized spot. They have this tiny little magnet, and they have a wand and a tablet that acts like a GPS that navigates them to where the marker is, and they can then measure and excise the specimen, so that it allows them now a lot of surgical options. They can plan a path that can kind of hide the scar. They can take out less tissue if they so choose. Like it gives them a lot of options to plan the best outcome for the patient, whether it be cosmetically or oncologically.
It sounds like it would simply be a faster procedure overall.
And we've heard that anecdotally as well, that because the second you put the wand on the breast, it guides you to where the lesion is. They're able to localize it right away. And then as they're cutting and removing tissue, they can keep checking that they've found the specimen to make sure that they're accurately removing the required amount while minimizing a cosmetic defect.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. So how did you get together with John, and from an engineering perspective, I'm curious on what some of those challenges were to ideate this and come up with this idea.
I've known John for too long. He actually was my first student hire out of my lab when I just started as a physicist and had my assistant professorship. He was my first ever summer student hire, and then I've known him ever since. And like seen him kind of evolve, and now like one of my most trusted partners, and he's brilliant. And I think the way I met him, like, so he interviewed for our lab, and what struck out to me was just he was always building things. Like it wasn't just one space. He was in race cars, he was building something with a boat. Like there was just a variety of stuff that he was tinkering, and like his tinkering and my tinkering blend well together, which makes us quite an effective team. And like his ability to like do and my ability to like make napkin sketches kind of as a match made. Well, I wouldn't say heaven, but it's a good one.
It's in heaven. It's on the way for sure. It's good work. It's good work. That design, was that a napkin? Was that, hey, I wonder if we could do something like this? Was it over a coffee or a beer where you two were just brainstorming about how to attack this challenge?
So like so it was in our lab, and we kind of set out very much, okay, this was not the first way we did it. There was several iterations of methods, like, and there was one where we try to make this like really elaborate stud finder, and we cranked up the strength of the current, and it blew a capacitor and lit the lab on fire. Like we went through iterations
That sounds like
like
Back to the Future stuff. Sorry.
yeah. there were moments of that as well, but I think that's where we gave it like reasonable approaches. Early days was just pure experimentation with real no like outcome in sight, but being very honest and brutal about this won't work, this is not going to work. And there's some technologies we tried that are now also in the market, and we like dismissed them because we saw some early like limitations. And we kept going through these iterative cycles until we arrived with Molly. And then there are moments where when you kind of it sticks and you're like, this is checking a lot of the boxes. This is fantastic. And then you start to socialize it with surgeons and more clinicians, and you get reinforcement. They obviously give you good feedback of like, this has to change, but you get reinforced that you're on the right track. And that's when it kind of stuck. But yeah, there was a lot of stuff and then the original impetus to do this stuff was actually over a Pepsi and hot dog on a weekend. So it was it was good. It was a very cool early journey.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, and I'm thinking of my audience because we have so many young startup ambitious founders and entrepreneurs and the like that perhaps haven't gotten as far as actually starting a company. It's good to hear that although you've had fairly rapid success to date, it wasn't without its share of trial and error, and not letting the outcome dictate your interest or sway you from continuing to drive forward for that solution.
Oh, I can't underscore that the valleys are deep and the peaks are high, but the valleys, if you can endure them, the peaks make it worth it for sure. So yeah, it is not without tribulation at all. Like there are moments where we were both very much on the verge, and then you just have to hang on, and then all of a sudden something comes in and accelerates you past that like verge of failure. So that hope it's hard fought, but it's really helpful to have a couple of partners on your team that are just as optimistic.
That's really sage advice. And as I think about your team and what you went through, I heard a couple things when you were sharing that I, again, think are super important. Your background in accentuating and putting emphasis on the human experience, and his foundation in a relentless engineering brain, no matter what he's tackling, coming together could be really that perfect marriage when it comes to product and market, because what happens often is we have an entrepreneur who's so bullish about what they want to engineer, they tend to forget about what that impact looks like, right? And then we also have the counter side of it as someone who wants to solve that problem so in a certain way, they get short-sighted on what that engineering capability could be modified to support, or how else could we address this? What other eyes could we look at? And I hear that, yes, you put a lot of value on your relationship as individuals together, but you also listen to the market, and you also relied on your clinical insight, and you got early feedback on the market and took that in.
Yeah, that is, I mean, even now as we launch new products over and over, the amount of value we place on real, honest feedback from clinicians, it's invaluable. It helps them because then the products that are launched are very specific, de-risked, easy to use, intuitive, and I think our experience really comes from our clinical exposure. Like like when I was a medical physicist, you're exposed to a lot of new technologies and a lot of companies. And I've had the misfortune of being part of, like, when technologies are the user design is not thoughtful and inexact. There've been treatment errors where you have to do these horrible conversations with patients and their family about, like, a mistake was made. So for us, design and exacting standards of, like, the curvature, the diameter, just the details have to be just right, because those matter.
Mm-hmm.
Those matter in terms of reducing risk, but they also matter because they just reduce the level of effort the clinical care team has to exert to ensure quality care, right? And if we can do that, we've done our job. So I think John appreciates that, I appreciate it, and the only way you get that is by asking the question, is this good enough? No. How do we get better? And keep doing that over and over again.
Yeah, no, you did a tremendous job with that. If you look at the design, I'll encourage anyone listening to check out the site. You've got some real slick video for that for actually the procedure. The emphasis on how the pen rides in the surgeon's hand, whether you have a large hand, a small hand, how it lays, how it works, and then the cognitive context, right? The music that you chose, the auditory cues that you hear. I heard it before I read that you intentionally made sure that it was a nice cognitive experience. As I was listening to it, I was like, "Ooh, that was nice. That's pleasant." So I can appreciate how much emphasis was put on both, not exclusively the patient, but the clinicians and everyone involved in that patient journey and in that care continuum. So that's really amazing. And I encourage, again, the audience, especially the entrepreneurs who are thinking about it, to gain the insight and the information as early as possible as you're baking your design that goes beyond your area of expertise. If you're an engineer, if you're a scientist, if you're a clinician, get the experience that's going to complement you. Don't get yourself in an echo chamber and get you locked into a road that's going to be difficult to turn around on.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that, Holly. That's very kind.
So you have a strong base of clinicians throughout Toronto, based on, I assume, your prior history. What was the biggest challenge for you from an adoption perspective? Was it getting outside of the region? Was it introducing it at scale? Here we are, fast forward, we got FDA approval in the US as well as approval in Canada. So I'm curious about what some of those headwinds looked like to get that get the approval, get the adoption, and get it rolling.
Each one of those inflection points you're talking about were incredibly challenging. Like getting FDA approval, coming from an academic facility to, like, building up the quality systems required to get FDA approval, that was all new. So obviously challenges there, and the FDA is a fantastic organization that pressures you to build quality. Mm-hmm. So this is where going through that rigor for the first time enforced that we build systems to a standard that, previous to that, when we were academic, we weren't held to. So that was a learning. And then we had a pretty strong network within Canada. We were able to leverage that to get early experiences on what's tolerable. And if I would argue the Canadian healthcare system being a publicly funded healthcare system has challenges because we don't it's always pressured economically, so value is incredibly important.
Mhm.
So figuring out what that value proposal and proposition was like, fortunately we were forced to do that very early on, so that when we transitioned to the US, it was then about scale. And then I think the challenge with going to the US market was building a sales team and an impactful sales team. And so that was also very new for us, like building an impactful sales team that was able to execute. So those iterations of our evolution, all fraught with challenges, but sticking through it and working through those dips are incredibly rewarding, because now I think the team we have now is phenomenal. And it's setting us up well for scale, but like the building process is, as you mentioned, that was challenging because you just don't know what the qualities are and what you need until you're out there and you kind of go through a few iterations of experimentation.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Your comments on the FDA too. So often people are like, oh boy, the FDA, but you're like, hey, they made us step up our game, basically. It's great to hear, and you passed the bar.
And I think, if you look at it as like they're putting these standards and it's a hurdle to jump, that's one way to look at it. I think we framed it very differently in the sense of like, they're putting some standards in, what can we do to make it even better? So not only do we just like meet those, but we just totally destroy them. And then you can use those as advantages for marketing and sales purpose, because now you've built in features that are not only address their needs for safety and efficacy, but they have now become so far beyond the rest of the field that they become an advantage and will help promote. So I actually, like, I think it might be contrary to most views, but that early days, I'm actually very grateful to the reviewers and FDA to force us to have that rigor
Mm-hmm.
and teach us how to reframe the interaction in a very positive light.
Mm-hmm. And that work, and it's another instance of where the early work done, if you put that work in early, it does pay off through marketing, clinical support, through market development activities, through second, third, fourth iteration technologies, through other indications, which I'm excited to talk about what the future looks like for Molly. That's you set the table appropriately. And I assume, based on the way you've built that out, that reimbursement is reimbursement been fairly simple to get based on existing services and products being used?
Yeah. The nice part about this is our product and setting this is where like finding that right value and pricing strategy. So we add value
Mm-hmm.
to not only your white citadels, academic large institutions, but the small rural community service. Because this is where, from my background, I really want to democratize this care and not just have it for the ivory towers of the world,
Mm-hmm.
but let this be globally accessible. So setting that value proposition so that we can sustain a business, but at the same time offer this to everyone was really important. So we just fit right into a lot of the reimbursement envelopes afforded throughout the US. So it really hasn't been something that is like pricing and stressing our value has not been a lot of the hurdle. Our biggest thing is just getting our name out and awareness and scaling and making sure we can go and visit as many people as fast as possible is probably our biggest challenge.
Understand, yeah, because it does take a little bit of hand holding in the beginning to make sure it's used appropriately, it's understood, yeah. Wow, good challenge to have. Good challenge to have.
Right.
So,
Right.
what are you most excited about, Ananth? You've got this is you're certainly in a healthy state and only getting healthier. So, what does the future look like?
I'm thrilled about two things. Is just the potential of the future. Like, I think that is where we've got the potential now. We're exploring going outside the US and North America. We're in Panama and in Asia, and we're expanding our footprint, which is another challenge onto its own. But on top of that, I think this solution of like finding a lesion in the body that's hard to find, hard to touch and feel is not just a breast problem. And you alluded to other soft tissues. So we're doing work in thoracic and colorectal and exploratory efforts to see what problems are there and how can we adequately solve them with our technology. It doesn't necessarily have to be the Molly fundamental. This is where our team is not, this is where I like our team, like John and myself, we're not tied to a particular way of doing things. We will find the right way and that will be the solution. But we now know, as we've got so many requests from thoracic surgeons saying like, I would love to use Molly in this site to take out these little nodules, and it's intrigued us. If we can help, it's incumbent on us to try and do so. So I'm really excited about that, the potential to like help in another site and a large cohort of patients that we could potentially improve their care.
Yeah, it's easy to visualize. Of course, I'm not a clinician, but it's easier to visualize that potential being used in other soft tissue applications or lymphatic system, or, it seems like it would be just, again, another simple, elegant solution that would address a major unmet need.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been incredible. I am so grateful that we were able to find some time in your busy global travel schedule. Thank you for making it for me. Please pass along our positive regards from Team TMG to everyone at Molly. They're wonderful to work with. And Ananth, thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you all for your tremendous support. It's been incredible.
We're looking forward to building and beyond. And to our audience, thank you for joining us today on Tech Talks. We'll see you again soon.